Hi, it's Kendra. I'm just going to show you a few examples of how I would put snow on trees. This is masking fluid that I'm just removing. I painted my background right over it. And then when it's completely dry, you can take it off. And it comes off quite easily if you've let the paper dry fully. And as long as you don't put any heat on it. So if you leave it in the sun or have a hairdryer on it, it might bake right onto your sheet and not come off. But if it's just been left cool for a few hours or a day, it comes off fine. This has been on for a whole week actually, and it still came off fine. So what I do is I treat each bough of snow separately, and I can do it in a number of ways. One is wet and wet. So this is just clean water. And I'm just going to add some cobalt blue to the top part of my snow. And then I have a mixture of ultramarine blue with rose madder genuine, which makes a purple. And I'm going to put it like a shadow here at the bottom. And the dark boughs under the snow are going to come later after this dry. Now I'm making mine quite dark because this is like a night scene, but you could leave a lot more white of the paper to make the snow glow more if it was a daytime scene. Another way you can do it is where you have wet on dry and then you use clean water to move the paint. So this is on dry paper. The first two examples were wet on wet. Clean my brush, dry it off on my towel, and I'm just pulling that into the rest of the bough here. And then I can switch colors and it'll just transition nicely. And then this is wet on dry again. So I used a little bit of water in the middle, and then I can just blend it a little bit like this by pulling it together. So I can also start with the shadow color on the dry. This is wet on dry. So it goes on a lot more saturated when you do wet on dry. When you're doing wet on wet, it actually looks a little bit more diluted and soft because the water dilutes the paint and makes it not so dark. And here I'm just blending the two colors together. So those are the two ways you can sort of do it on the little snow boughs. And then if you wanted it to be more of a daytime scene and have more light, there's a couple of ways you can do that. So one is I can wet the bough, and I'm going to do wet and wet, but this time I'm only going to put color near the shadow side and let it bleed up towards where the sunlight would be hitting. For example, if the sun was coming from the left over here, and then see all that white that shows, so it looks like white snow. And I can even use a damp brush to pull some of that away if I want it to be even lighter. And then that's how I would approach it if this was a sunny day and I wanted it to look really light. And another thing you can do is you can leave a sliver of dry paper to guarantee that you don't lose all your white. So here I've left a little sliver of completely dry paper. And then when I put my shadow in, even if it sort of runs into the water, it won't go over the entire bough, and I'll have a crisp white edge. And that really looks like the sun is hitting it. But because mine is at sunset, I'm going to cover up the white. I don't want it to be bright white. So again, I can do it on dry paper like this. This is wet on dry, and I can just switch colors as I go. I don't even need to use the water in the middle if it's a small little one like that. Or I can do wet on wet. There, so that's a wet on wet, and this one's wet on dry. So you can see that the wet on dry is going to be a lot darker, brighter colors, and the wet and wet is more subdued, soft, subtle, as it is a little bit more diluted. If you're quick, you can work on more than one bough at a time, but I wouldn't wet all of them and then try to do them wet and wet, because the first one will be dry by the time you get to the last one, and you will find that you won't get the wet and wet effect. Another way you can do it is to paint the entire snow bough all one color and then drop the shadow color into it. So I'll do this entire clump of snow in cobalt blue, and then I'll take my purple that I mix with ultramarine blue, rose madder genuine, and I'll just drop it in. And that's another way you can do it. Just putting in some little shadows where the boughs of the snow sort of have a bump underneath, and where they dip up, there's usually a little shadow there. So I'm just putting in some shadows wherever there's a little V underneath the snow boughs. If any stand out too much and have hard lines, then just take some water on your brush, dab it off on your towel, and just soften one side there like this. And then they won't stand out so much, but they'll still be there and add to the look of it. Now, once that is dry, I am going to mix some ultramarine blue with rose madder genuine and some burnt sienna to create a dark indigo or purpley gray to make the boughs coming up from under the branches. Now, I don't recommend rose madder genuine because it is a fugitive color and it doesn't hold its light fastness over time. It will fade over time, which I did not know when I bought it. It's such a lovely color because it's transparent and it smells like roses, but it doesn't have a long light. So I recommend buying a more permanent, for example, permanent rose. Now, if I was doing this as a daytime painting, I would put some Hooker's green into my mix. So I would use ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, and Hooker's green with or without a touch of rose, depending on what color I get, and to make sort of a very dark wintry green. But because this is a night painting, I'm not going to use any green in mine. So I'm making more of an indigo or even Payne's gray. I'm sort of making my own. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull down some branches underneath the boughs of snow. So there's usually no branches above the boughs, usually below, but at the top there might be a little bit of the top of the tree poking out here like this. Sometimes the first few branches are poking upwards, and then as the snow weighs them down and as they get more mature and heavier, they tend to sort of sweep downwards anyways, and then they come out from beneath these clumps of snow like this. And by doing the dark part of the tree last, then you don't risk it bleeding into the snow. If you do the dark part of the tree first and then the snow on top, when you add the shadows to the snow, it can bleed. The darks always want to bleed. They always want to come back to life. So it would actually be really difficult. And I did that on some paintings, and you just have to be really careful when you're wetting your snow, if you're doing wet and wet, and be very gentle so that you don't wake up those dark colors. So this way, by doing the snow first, you really don't have to worry about that. Maybe there's a few branches poking through under there. I'm mostly using downward pulls, and I'm trying not to cover it like I'm quilting around it. So I'm trying to be a bit uneven on purpose, hopefully. So easy to try to make everything look exactly the same and all level. It's kind of our nature. A little bit of water down here. It's okay if some of those boughs bleed into it. I'm going to put some ultramarine blue with Rose Madder Genuine. Oh, it's too purple. I'm intentionally skipping over a few spots, and then I'm going to soften those edges with my damp brush. And I'm just wiping it on my towel between each swipe. I'm just wiggling my brush over those areas. I can clean my brush, but I'm always going to dab off the water on my towel so that I don't flood it back into my painting. I'm just softening out those edges. Wet my brush, dab it off. There we go. And if any places appear too dark, I can add some shadow back in, just with the knowledge that those little dark boughs might bleed into the paint. I just don't feel like it would be so light down here.